Maya looked like any other tired passenger sleeping in seat 8A. Nobody knew she was actually a skilled pilot with thousands of flight hours. When the captain suddenly collapsed and a dangerous storm appeared ahead, the flight attendant made a desperate announcement asking for help. Maya's secret was about to save everyone. Before you watch full video, comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. The cabin lights were dimmed for the overnight flight from Chicago to Seattle. Outside the small windows, city lights faded into darkness as Flight 447 climbed steadily toward its cruising altitude. The Boeing 737-800 was nearly full with 147 passengers, most of them business travelers and families heading home after the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. In seat 8A, Maya Chen adjusted her window shade and pulled her small travel blanket up to her chin. She had chosen the window seat specifically because it was quieter and she could lean against the wall to sleep. To anyone looking at her, she appeared to be just another tired traveler, a young woman in her early 30s wearing a comfortable gray sweater and dark jeans, maybe a business consultant or teacher heading home after a long week of meetings. The flight attendants had noticed her during boarding. She was polite but quiet, declining their offer of a pre-flight beverage and simply asking for a pillow. She carried only a small black carry-on bag with no airline logos or company stickers that might give away her profession. Her movements were calm and confident, but nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything other than a regular passenger. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign turned off, the flight attendants began their quiet service routine. They moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, their soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper on the carpeted aisle. When they reached row 8, they paused to look at Maya's peaceful form and exchanged knowing glances. "She's been out since we took off," whispered Janet Rodriguez, the senior flight attendant, to her colleague. "Poor thing must have had a really long day." They were careful not to disturb her as they served drinks to the other passengers in her row. The businessman in 8B, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, was working on his laptop with the brightness turned down low. He glanced at Maya and shook his head sympathetically. "Some people can sleep anywhere," he murmured to the flight attendant. "I wish I had that ability." Across the aisle in 8C, an elderly couple from Minnesota was quietly discussing their plans to visit their grandchildren in Seattle. They spoke in hushed tones, mindful of the sleeping woman nearby. "She looks like she could be a teacher," the elderly woman whispered to her husband. "Or maybe someone in marketing. These young professional women work such long hours." Throughout the first hour of the flight, passengers occasionally glanced at Maya with a mix of envy and concern. In today's fast-paced world, the ability to fall asleep so peacefully on an airplane seemed like a luxury. Some assumed she must be a frequent traveler who had mastered the art of sleeping on planes. Others wondered if she might be dealing with exhaustion from overwork or personal stress. What none of them could have imagined was the truth about Maya Chen's background and the irony of her peaceful slumber on this particular flight. What none of them knew was that Maya Chen was far more than she appeared. Hidden beneath her ordinary passenger facade was an extraordinary professional background that would soon prove invaluable to everyone aboard Flight 447. Maya was a seasoned commercial airline pilot with over 8,000 flight hours logged in her career. She held an airline transport pilot license, the highest level of pilot certification, and was current on multiple aircraft types including the Boeing 737 they were flying in tonight. Her logbook, safely stored in her apartment back in Seattle, told the story of a remarkable aviation career that began in the United States Air Force. After graduating from the Air Force Academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering, Maya had spent 5 years flying C-130 transport aircraft for the military. She had flown missions in challenging conditions around the world, from dusty airstrips in Afghanistan to ice-covered runways in Alaska. Her military experience had taught her to handle emergencies with calm precision and to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. Following her military service, Maya had transitioned to commercial aviation, starting as a first officer with a regional airline before moving up to captain at a major carrier. She had accumulated experience flying coast-to-coast routes, dealing with everything from mechanical failures to severe weather systems. Just last month, she had successfully handled an engine failure on takeoff, bringing her aircraft and 134 passengers back safely to the departure airport. But this week had been particularly demanding, even by Maya's standards. She had just completed her annual recurrent training, which included 3 days of intensive simulator sessions covering every possible emergency scenario. She had practiced engine failures, hydraulic system malfunctions, electrical problems, and severe weather encounters. The training was mentally and physically exhausting, designed to keep pilots sharp and prepared for any situation they might face in actual flight operations. The final day of training had been especially brutal. Maya had spent 8 hours in the simulator dealing with multiple system failures, practicing approaches in low-visibility conditions, and demonstrating her ability to handle crisis situations. The instructors had thrown everything at her: engine fires, cabin depressurization, landing gear problems, and navigation system failures. She had passed all the scenarios with flying colors, but the intensity of the training had left her drained. After completing her recurrent training, Maya had been looking forward to a few days off to rest and recover. She had deliberately booked herself on this late-night flight as a passenger rather than working crew member because she wanted to decompress from the week's intensity. She had chosen not to identify herself to the flight crew, a decision that wasn't uncommon among off-duty pilots who simply wanted to travel without being asked to help with minor operational issues. Maya had carefully removed all signs of her professional identity before leaving for the airport. Her pilot uniform was hanging in her hotel closet, her commercial pilot license was tucked away in her wallet, and her crew badge was in her flight bag at home. She wore civilian clothes and carried a plain black bag that gave no indication of her aviation background. To anyone observing her, she was just another anonymous passenger. This anonymity was exactly what Maya wanted. Too many times in the past, she had been traveling as a passenger when crew members discovered her identity and asked for assistance with routine matters, helping to calm nervous passengers during turbulence, providing a professional opinion on minor mechanical issues, or simply offering another pair of experienced eyes in the cockpit during challenging approaches. While she was always willing to help her colleagues, sometimes she just wanted to be a regular passenger who could sleep peacefully without worrying about aviation operations. Tonight was supposed to be one of those times. Maya had planned to sleep during the entire 3-hour flight, wake up refreshed when they landed in Seattle, and take a taxi home to her quiet apartment. She had no scheduled flights for the next 4 days, giving her time to catch up on rest, do some personal errands, and maybe visit her sister who lived across town. Up in the cockpit, Captain James Morrison and First Officer Lisa Park were conducting their own quiet routines. Morrison, a 22-year veteran with over 15,000 flight hours, was feeling unusually tired tonight. At 54 years old, he had been flying commercial aircraft for more than 2 decades, but lately he had been experiencing occasional chest discomfort and shortness of breath. He had mentioned it to his wife, but like many pilots approaching retirement, he was reluctant to see a doctor for fear it might affect his medical certificate and end his flying career prematurely. Tonight, the discomfort seemed more pronounced than usual. Morrison attributed it to the stress of flying in deteriorating weather conditions and the fatigue from working several challenging flights over the past few days. He had taken some antacid tablets before the flight and told himself he just needed to get through this trip and then take some time off. First Officer Park, meanwhile, was focused intently on her duties but feeling a growing sense of unease about the weather ahead. At 29 years old with 2,800 flight hours, she was a competent and careful pilot, but she had less experience than many of her peers with severe weather operations. The meteorological reports for their route showed a rapidly intensifying storm system developing between Chicago and Seattle, with reports of severe turbulence, hail, and dangerous wind shear conditions. As Flight 447 flew through the peaceful night sky at 35,000 feet, none of the 149 people aboard could have predicted how dramatically their situation was about to change. The combination of Captain Morrison's deteriorating medical condition, the approaching severe weather, and Maya's hidden expertise sleeping quietly in Seat 8A was about to create a scenario that would test everyone's skills and courage. Captain James Morrison, a 22-year veteran pilot, suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. He gripped the control yoke tighter, trying to steady himself as sweat broke out on his forehead. First Officer Lisa Park, focused on her instrument readings, didn't notice at first. "Jim, you okay?" she asked when she saw him struggling. I think I'm having a heart attack," Morrison gasped, his left arm going numb. "I need you to take control of the aircraft," Morrison managed to say before slumping forward in his seat, his breathing becoming labored and irregular. The words sent a chill through the cockpit. Park immediately took control of the Boeing 737, her hands steady on the yoke despite the adrenaline surge she felt. Her training kicked in automatically as she began running through the procedures for pilot incapacitation. "Captain Morrison is incapacitated," Park announced into her headset, alerting Seattle Center Air Traffic Control. "We have a medical emergency in the cockpit and are requesting priority handling and immediate clearance to the nearest suitable airport." Flight 447, Seattle Center copies your emergency. What is the nature of the medical emergency and do you require immediate assistance? We have pilot incapacitation due to suspected cardiac event, Park replied, maintaining her professional composure while her mind raced through the implications. First officer assuming command of aircraft. Requesting vectors to Seattle and paramedic assistance upon arrival. But even as Park handled the immediate crisis, she became aware of a second, equally serious problem developing. The weather radar display in front of her showed a massive storm system directly ahead of their route, a solid wall of red and yellow indicating severe turbulence, heavy precipitation and potentially dangerous conditions. When they had received their pre-flight weather briefing in Chicago, the meteorologists had mentioned a developing weather system over the Pacific Northwest, but the storms had intensified much more rapidly than predicted. What had been forecast as moderate turbulence and light precipitation had evolved into a dangerous system with reports of hail, severe wind shear, and turbulence strong enough to damage aircraft. Park realized she was facing the most challenging situation of her flying career. Not only was she now the sole pilot responsible for 147 passengers and crew members, but she would have to navigate through severe weather conditions that would test the limits of her experience and skill. In the cabin, the passengers remained unaware of the developing crisis. Maya continued to sleep peacefully in seat 8A, her breathing slow and regular as she rested against the window. The businessman in 8B had finally closed his laptop and was dozing with his reading light still on. Throughout the aircraft, most passengers were either sleeping or quietly reading, completely unaware that their lives were about to depend on the quick thinking and professional skills of their flight crew. Senior Flight Attendant Janet Rodriguez received the emergency call from the cockpit and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. With 18 years of airline experience, she had been through several medical emergencies, but never one involving the pilot in command during challenging flight conditions. Rodriguez quietly alerted her fellow flight attendants to the situation, using hand signals and whispered conversations to avoid alarming the passengers. They began preparing for the possibility of a difficult approach and landing, securing loose items in the galley and reviewing their emergency procedures. "How bad is it up there?" Rodriguez asked Park through the cockpit interphone, speaking quietly to avoid being overheard by passengers. "Captain Morrison is unconscious and unresponsive," Park replied, her voice steady but tense with concentration. "I'm flying single pilot into severe weather conditions. I could really use assistance from someone with more experience, someone who knows emergency procedures and can help me think through the approach phase." Rodriguez nodded, understanding immediately what Park was asking. She knew that airlines occasionally carried off-duty pilots as passengers, and in emergency situations, these qualified personnel could provide valuable assistance to the operating crew. It was a long shot but worth trying. "I'll make an announcement," Rodriguez said. "Maybe we'll get lucky." She knew the announcement might cause some anxiety among the passengers, but the benefits of finding qualified help far outweighed the risks of causing worry. She had to be careful with her wording, specific enough to attract the attention of any pilots aboard, but general enough to avoid creating panic. Rodriguez returned to the cabin and picked up the intercom handset. She took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change the atmosphere aboard Flight 447 forever. Maya was in the middle of a peaceful dream about her first solo flight during pilot training when the intercom crackled to life. Even in sleep, her pilot's instincts remained alert to any changes in the aircraft's normal sounds and operations. The unusual timing of an announcement during the quiet hours of a red-eye flight caused her subconscious to stir. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant speaking." Rodriguez's voice was calm and professional, but Maya's trained ear detected the underlying tension. "We have encountered a medical emergency in the cockpit, and our captain is unable to continue his duties. Our first officer is safely operating the aircraft, but we are also facing challenging weather conditions that require immediate attention." Maya's eyes snapped open instantly. Years of emergency training had conditioned her to go from deep sleep to full alertness in seconds when she heard certain words or phrases. Medical emergency in the cockpit was exactly the kind of announcement that triggered her professional instincts. "If there are any qualified pilots among our passengers, commercial pilots, military aviators, flight instructors, or anyone with significant aviation experience, please press your call button immediately. We need your assistance to ensure the safety of everyone aboard." Around the cabin, passengers began to stir and look around nervously. The businessman in 8B sat up straight, his face showing concern as he processed what he had just heard. The elderly couple across the aisle exchanged worried glances, and throughout the aircraft, people began whispering anxiously to their companions. Medical emergency in the cockpit? The businessman whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. What does that mean exactly? Is the pilot okay? A mother traveling with 2 young children in the row behind them leaned forward. Does this mean we're in danger? Should I wake up my kids? Maya sat up straight, her mind instantly clearing as her professional training took over. She could feel the subtle changes in the aircraft's movement that indicated they were encountering turbulence, and she noticed the slight variations in engine sound that suggested the autopilot was working harder to maintain stable flight. Her experienced pilot's senses were picking up signs that most passengers would never notice. She looked around the cabin, scanning for any other passengers who might be showing signs of aviation knowledge or experience. A few people were reaching for their phones, though they would find no cellular service at cruising altitude. Others were gripping their armrests as the aircraft encountered the first wisps of turbulence from the approaching storm system. Maya's finger hovered over the call button. Part of her wanted to remain anonymous, to let someone else handle the situation. After the exhausting week of recurrent training, she had been looking forward to a quiet trip home as just another passenger. She was tired, both physically and mentally, and the thought of taking on the responsibility for 147 lives was daunting. But as she heard the increasing concern in passengers' voices around her and felt the aircraft's movement becoming more pronounced, she knew she couldn't ignore her professional responsibility. Her years of training, both in the military and in commercial aviation, had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. If there was any way she could help ensure the safety of everyone aboard, she had a duty to respond. The turbulence was getting noticeably stronger now, and she could see lightning flashes through the window that indicated they were approaching the severe weather system. Time was running out for making critical decisions about their route and approach. She pressed the call button. Rodriguez appeared within seconds as if she had been waiting nearby. Are you a pilot? Rodriguez asked quietly. Yes, Maya replied, already unbuckling her seatbelt. Commercial airline pilot with 8,000 hours. Military transport experience. Current on Boeing 737 systems. Relief flooded Rodriguez's face. Thank God. The cockpit is this way. As Maya stood, the businessman in 8B stared at her in shock. You're a pilot? But you've been sleeping this whole time. I was off duty, Maya said simply, following Rodriguez toward the front of the aircraft. The turbulence was getting worse. Maya had to grip the seat backs to maintain her balance as they made their way through the cabin. Some passengers were starting to look frightened, and she could hear a child crying in the back. What's our situation? Maya asked Rodriguez as they approached the cockpit door. Captain Morrison collapsed about 10 minutes ago. First Officer Park is flying, but she's never handled weather this severe on her own. We're about an hour out from Seattle, but there's a major storm system between us and the airport. Maya nodded. She had flown through plenty of storms, both in military transports and commercial aircraft. It wasn't easy, but it was manageable with the right approach. The cockpit door opened, and Maya got her first look at the situation. Captain Morrison was unconscious in the left seat, and First Officer Park was gripping the controls with both hands as the aircraft bucked through the turbulence. I'm Maya Chin, commercial pilot, she said, moving to the observer's seat behind the pilots. What's your experience level? Lisa Park, First Officer, 2,800 hours, Park replied without taking her eyes off the instruments. I've never flown through anything like this as pilot in command. Maya quickly scanned the instrument panel. Airspeed, altitude, heading, everything looked normal except for the weather radar, which showed a solid wall of red and yellow directly ahead. Okay, Lisa, you're doing great, Maya said, her voice calm and reassuring. I'm going to help you get through this. First thing, what's our fuel situation? About 45 minutes remaining, Park replied. But Seattle Airport is reporting severe weather too. They might not be able to land us. Maya studied the weather display. The storm was massive, stretching for hundreds of miles. But she could see a possible route around the worst of it. I see a gap about 30 miles to the south, she said. If we deviate now, we might be able to avoid the worst turbulence and still make it to Seattle. Are you sure? Park asked. I don't want to make things worse. I've been through storms like this before, Maya assured her. Trust me. Request a heading change to 180 degrees. Park keyed her radio. Seattle Center, Flight 447 requesting deviation to heading 180 to avoid severe weather. Flight 447 approved. Turn right to heading 180. Be advised, we're showing extreme precipitation ahead of your current track. As Park began the turn, Maya continued to coach her through the process. Gentle inputs on the controls. Let the aircraft do the work. Don't fight the turbulence, work with it. The next 20 minutes were intense. Lightning flashed outside the cockpit windows, and the aircraft shook violently as they skirted the edge of the storm. Maya remained calm, providing constant guidance to Park. Airspeed's dropping, Park called out as they hit a downdraft. Add power, raise the nose slightly, Maya instructed. Just a little. There you go. In the cabin, passengers gripped their seats as the aircraft pitched and rolled through the turbulence. The flight attendants had secured the cabin and taken their seats, but Maya could hear nervous conversations and the occasional scream when lightning lit up the windows. "How's Captain Morrison?" Maya asked Rodriguez, who had remained in the cockpit. "Still unconscious, but his breathing is stable. The paramedics will be waiting when we land." "Good. Lisa, how are you feeling?" "You're doing an excellent job." Park managed a brief smile. "Better with you here." "I was starting to panic." "That's normal," Maya said. "The key is to trust your training and take it one step at a time. Look, we're almost through the worst of it." Sure enough, the turbulence was beginning to ease as they flew around the southern edge of the storm. The weather radar showed clearer skies ahead, and Seattle Approach Control came on the radio with landing instructions. Flight 447, contact Seattle Approach on frequency 118.3. Weather at Seattle is improving, winds 270 at 15, visibility 5 miles and light rain. "Thank you, Center," Park replied, then switched frequencies. Seattle Approach, Flight 447 with you, flight level 350, requesting descent. Flight 447, Seattle Approach. We have your emergency noted. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Paramedics are standing by. As they began their descent toward Seattle, Maya helped Park run through the approach checklist. Despite the crisis, everything was proceeding normally now that they were clear of the storm. "You know," Park said as they leveled off at 24,000 feet, "I was terrified when Captain Morrison collapsed. I thought we were all going to die." "You handled it perfectly," Maya replied. "You kept the aircraft under control, called for help, and accepted assistance when it was offered. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. But I'm just a first officer. I'm not qualified to be captain." "Experience doesn't come from your rank," Maya said. "It comes from how you handle situations like this. Today you probably gained more real-world experience than most pilots get in years." As they continued their descent, Maya looked back at Captain Morrison. He was still unconscious, but his color looked better. She hoped the medical team would be able to help him recover. Flight 447, turn left heading 270, descend and maintain 10,000, approach control instructed. Left 270 down to 10,000, Park acknowledged, making the turn smoothly. Maya noticed how much more confident Park sounded now. The crisis had forced her to grow as a pilot, and she was handling the approach like a seasoned professional. Seattle weather is now reporting winds calm, visibility 10 miles, broken clouds at 3,000 feet, the controller added. Runway 16 left is available for your approach. We'll take 16 left, Park replied. Flight 447 requesting ILS approach. As they flew through 10,000 feet, Maya helped Park configure the aircraft for landing. Flaps, landing gear, final approach checklist, everything proceeded normally. The worst was behind them. There's the runway, Park said as they broke through the clouds at 3,000 feet. Seattle's lights stretched out below them, and runway 16 left was clearly visible ahead. Beautiful approach, Maya said. Just like the simulator. Park smiled as she lined up with the runway centerline. Except the simulator never taught me how to handle a heart attack and a thunderstorm at the same time. That's why we have procedures, Maya replied. And why we help each other when things get tough. Flight 447 touched down smoothly on runway 16 left at 4:23 a.m. As they rolled out, emergency vehicles could be seen racing alongside the aircraft, ready to assist Captain Morrison. Flight 447, contact ground on 121.9. Emergency crews are standing by at gate A7, the tower controller said. Ground control 121.9, thank you for your help tonight, Park replied. As they taxied toward the gate, Maya felt the familiar satisfaction that came from handling a difficult situation successfully. But she also felt something else, pride in how well Park had performed under pressure. You know, Lisa, she said as they approached the gate, you didn't need me as much as you thought. You had everything under control. I couldn't have done it without you, Park insisted. When I heard that announcement asking for pilots, I was hoping someone would respond. I just never expected it to be the woman who was sleeping peacefully in 8A. Maya laughed. That's the thing about emergencies, they don't wait for convenient times. Sometimes the help you need comes from the most unexpected places. As the aircraft came to a stop at the gate, Maya helped Park complete the shutdown checklist while the paramedics boarded to assist Captain Morrison. The passengers began deplaning, many of them stopping to thank both pilots for getting them home safely. "Ma'am," said the businessman from 8B as he passed the cockpit, "I owe you an apology. When I saw you sleeping, I thought you were just another tired passenger. I had no idea you were a pilot." "That was the point," Maya replied with a smile. "I was trying to be just another tired passenger." As the cabin emptied, Rodriguez approached Maya with a cup of coffee. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You probably saved all our lives tonight." "I just did what any pilot would do," Maya said. "We look out for each other." "The airline is going to want to talk to you," Rodriguez continued. "There will be reports to file, interviews with the FAA?" Maya nodded. She had expected as much. Emergency incidents always required extensive documentation and investigation. Her quiet trip home had turned into something much more complicated. "That's okay," she said. "It comes with the territory." As Maya finally gathered her things to leave the aircraft, she reflected on the night's events. She had begun the flight as a sleeping passenger in seat 8A, wanting nothing more than to be left alone. But when crisis struck, her training and experience had made the difference between a successful emergency landing and a potential tragedy. Captain Morrison was conscious by the time they loaded him into the ambulance, and the doctor said his prognosis was good. First Officer Park had gained invaluable experience that would serve her well throughout her career. And 147 passengers had arrived safely in Seattle, most of them never knowing how close they had come to disaster. As Maya walked through the terminal toward the taxi stand, she was already looking forward to sleeping in her own bed. But she also knew that the next time she heard an emergency announcement on a flight, she wouldn't hesitate to respond. That's what pilots do, they help each other whether they're on duty or off, whether they're in the cockpit or sleeping in seat 8A. The storm had passed and everyone was home safe. In the end, that was all that mattered.